During the Spring Festival of 2001, I was 19, carrying 1,965 yuan I had saved from a year of migrant work and took a green train back to Tunxi. As soon as I left the station and felt my pocket, the money was gone. The suit jacket I had specially bought was still on me, and the Motorola phone I had bought from a scalper for 300 yuan was still there. Only the money had been picked clean. From the train station to my home, that small village at the junction of Zhujiang, Jiangxi, and Anhui, was still more than 30 kilometers away. Originally, a 3 yuan shuttle bus would have gotten me to the town, but in the end I walked a full 8 hours. It snowed all day, and I wore that not very warm suit, walking from dawn till dark. When I got home, it was a little after 6 p.m., and the village's black four-eyed dog barked at me like mad. I wasn't afraid of the dog. I was afraid of not being able to hold my head up in front of Fifth Uncle. Fifth Uncle walked from the kitchen shed to the main hall, looked me up and down, and said, "How did you end up getting back so late?" I said the train was in the afternoon, and by the time I got to town it was already evening. Before I had even finished speaking, Fifth Aunt shot me a sideways glance. "You didn't even have money for the trip home?" Just as I was about to open my mouth, Fifth Uncle frowned. "Hurry and get the food ready. Stop nagging here." Fifth Uncle got me out of it, and I slipped into the room. But the next day, the whole village knew my money had been stolen. Whenever I ran into someone I knew, the first thing they said was, "Your money got stolen." I could only stiffen the corners of my mouth and mumble a response. At dinner that night, Fifth Uncle had a little to drink and said to me, "If the money's gone, it's gone. As long as you're okay, that's what matters. Next year when you go out again, work hard and save more." Fifth Aunt came over with her bowl and put some food in my dish. "You don't have anything to do these next few days, and you don't have any money on you. Tomorrow, follow your uncle up the mountain and catch some wild animals to sell for money." I immediately perked up. Fifth Uncle had never gone out to do migrant work in his life. He couldn't stand being ordered around. The couple did some farm work at home, and hunting was a sideline. I knew he was good at hunting. Hunting with a homemade shotgun, animal traps, wire snares, even making poison bait. He knew it all. I said I'd go. Early the next morning, Fifth Uncle carried the homemade shotgun, with a powder horn and a bag of steel pellets hanging from his waist. Fifth Aunt handed me an old bamboo bow. "Your dad used to use this." I took it, feeling a bit bitter inside, set it aside, and urged Fifth Uncle to hurry up and go. The snow was nearly 20 centimeters deep, swallowing half of my tall rubber boots, and it crunched underfoot. Before we entered the mountain, Fifth Uncle handed me a plastic bag. "Hold this." I opened it and saw stir-fried rice grains, carrying a faint, strange smell. Only later did I learn that this was poison bait stir-fried with pesticide. The rice grains and pesticide were mixed in proportion and stir-fried slowly over low heat. The heat couldn't be too high, or the toxicity would weaken. Even the steam from frying it was poisonous, so you had to turn your head to the side and wear a mask. Fifth Uncle told me to go under a stand of fir trees, sweep away the snow, and scatter half the rice grains there. I snapped off a dead branch and swept out a patch of open ground, then grabbed a few handfuls and scattered them. The smell became even more noticeable. Before we left, Fifth Uncle had me wash my hands in a ditch. We kept going deeper into the mountains, and the snow got thicker and thicker. The scenery was truly beautiful, green mountains and white snow stretching together like a boundless ink-wash painting. When we reached a mountain valley, Fifth Uncle suddenly stopped. On the ground was a string of tiny plum blossom-shaped footprints, disappearing from the bushes on the left into the weeds on the right. The four toes were perfectly clear, about the size of a cherry. "What kind of thing is this?" I asked in a low voice. "A rat." I froze. Rat footprints that big. Proportionally speaking, that rat had to weigh at least more than half a kilo, about the size of a 2-month-old kitten. But Fifth Uncle wasn't interested in tracking it. Rat meat was scarce, hard to catch, and not worth it. After we entered the second half of the valley, a new clue appeared, a large patch of chaotic hoofprints. Each hoofprint looked like two pointed rabbit ears, the tips curving inward, varying in size, and especially conspicuous on the snow. Fifth Uncle crouched down and studied them for quite a while, then turned his head to look along the direction of the tracks, and suddenly grinned. "We're having wild boar tonight." My heartbeat began to quicken. Fifth Uncle started tracking the wild boar prints. Every time we came to a place where the tracks were clear, he would squat down and touch the prints with his fingers. Only later did I understand that after snow is stepped on, within an hour the compressed snow feels about the same as when it was first stepped on. After 3 hours it starts to harden. After 5 hours it will noticeably ice over. And after more than a day a thin layer of ice will freeze over the pointed grooves in the hoof prints. He was judging how long ago the herd of wild boars had passed, We wound our way through shrubs, pine woods, and mixed forest for more than 2 hours, and finally stopped outside a bamboo grove. Fifth uncle raised a hand to signal me not to move. He lowered his voice. "Don't make a sound." Then he began checking the muzzleloader. He fished out a pinch of cotton from the pouch at his waist, stuffed it into the muzzle, and rammed it all the way down with a short steel rod. Next, he opened the horn that held the gunpowder. The horn's cap was a section of thin bamboo tube, just about as long as one finger joint. He filled one bamboo tube with gunpowder, then stuffed in a wad of cotton. After that, a section of steel rod about 2 centimeters long slid in, and finally another wad of cotton to seal it. But he still wasn't done. He then took out a red percussion cap and gently set it under the hammer, then finally wedged a piece of bamboo in place as a safety to prevent an accidental discharge. "Stand farther back. Don't stay too close behind me," Fifth uncle said, staring into my eyes. We followed the wild boar tracks into the bamboo grove, a little above the middle of the mountainside. The tracks were heading downward, which meant the herd of wild boars was below us. We had not gone far when a sharp pig squeal suddenly came from below. It wasn't that grunting sound, but the high-pitched shriek a pig makes when startled or enraged. Fifth uncle made a sharp backward wave with his hand. I stopped in place immediately. Fifth uncle bent down and felt his way over, using the ferns as cover. I trailed about 10 meters behind him, following while holding my breath. Circling around a clump of shrubs, the herd came into view. 3 adult wild boars and 7 or 8 piglets. The large wild boars were covered in brownish-black long hair and looked to weigh more than 200 gene, with both ears pricked up warily as they rooted around for food. Fifth uncle hid behind the shrubs and raised the gun to aim. My palms were sweating with nerves. Then he suddenly let out a whistle. Shoo! Before I could even react, the gun went off. With a thunderous bang, a huge cloud of white smoke burst out and completely obscured the view. The sound of a wild boar screaming came from within the white smoke, followed immediately by the chaotic noise of running. When the smoke cleared, I looked ahead and saw that the place where the herd had been was already empty. Where was Fifth uncle? When I lowered my head, I found him clutching the muzzleloader and having thrown himself into the bushes, motionless. If I hadn't been watching him the whole time, I would never have noticed he was there. About 3 minutes later, Fifth uncle finally climbed back up cautiously. "Did you hit it?" I asked. "I did." His expression was grim, and he was still listening to the sounds around us. The bamboo grove was deathly quiet, with only the occasional rustling sound of snow sliding off the bamboo leaves. After waiting a while longer, my feet had gone numb from the cold before Fifth uncle finally walked toward where the wild boars had been just now. The snow on the ground had been churned into a mess by the wild boars, exposing black soil, stones, and bamboo shoot husks. Not far away was a small pool of blood. Fifth uncle crouched down to look at it for a few moments, then began searching for tracks. Drops of blood appeared one by one on the snow, especially conspicuous. We tracked from the bamboo grove into the mixed forest, and then from the mixed forest into the thickets. In some places the snow was thin, and we almost lost the trail, relying entirely on those few intermittent drops of blood. After chasing for several hundred meters, from halfway down the mountain to its foot, the tracks climbed up another ridge. At this point the bloodstains began to increase, changing from drop by drop to patch by patch. Fifth uncle whispered a warning to be careful and plunged into the tangled grass. I raised my hand to shield myself from the cutting blades and followed him in. After only a few steps, a black wild beast was lying in the snow, still giving off steam. A big wild boar. I was so excited my hands and feet felt hot. Fifth uncle's expression visibly relaxed, but he still did not go straight up to it. He stood where he was and listened for a while longer. Only after confirming there was no movement did he level his gun at the boar and slowly approach. This was my first time personally taking part in a hunt. From tracking and hiding to seeing the prey fallen before my eyes at this moment, the feeling was impossible to describe. The wild boar was a little over a meter long, with a terrifyingly thick front half, while its hind legs looked comparatively small, exactly the opposite of a domestic pig. Its bristles were very stiff. I touched them, and they felt like palm fibers. Fifth uncle went into the woods, cut a long wooden stake as thick as an arm, then pulled off several vines, and deftly tied up the wild boar. It's rare to get such heavy snow this year. I haven't seen it many times in my life. He straightened up and patted the bits of snow off his clothes. An idea suddenly came to me. Then can we take advantage of this heavy snow sealing off the mountains and hunt more things? We'll see. When the snow is deep in the high mountains, wild animals that can't find food will run down to the lower hills, so the opportunity is rare. But the new year is coming soon, so we'll talk about it then. Can you carry it? Fifth uncle bared his teeth and asked, pointing at the wild boar. I was delighted and, without thinking, went to grab the back end of the wooden stake. Don't worry, no problem. The facts proved I had overestimated myself. The wild boar weighed over 200 gene, and with the stake it was nearly 250 gene. The two of us carried it on the way down the mountain, with me at the back. Logically the back end should have been lighter, but my shoulders still hurt as if it were cramping from the weight. Fifth uncle didn't say anything to me. After walking a stretch, he would take the initiative to suggest a rest. I felt secretly grateful. After walking for more than half an hour, just as we were about to leave the mountain, we ran into several people coming toward us. I recognized the one in front. Lu Jujin, the village's old pig butcher. Oh, not bad today. Lu Jujin stared at the wild boar, his face full of envy. Fifth uncle only grinned in response and said nothing more. As Lu Jujin passed by me, he suddenly asked, "You're Ling Laoxi's son, right?" I chuckled and nodded. His mind was clearly not on me. After brushing past, he called out to stop Fifth uncle again and asked whether he knew where there were medicinal herbs. There were also 3 people from the city with him, carrying bamboo baskets and small hoes. Fifth uncle said there might be some in Shushanjiao, and Lu Jujin led them off toward the deep mountains. When we got home, quite a few villagers gathered around. Fifth uncle told me not to ramble. He would handle them. We didn't even have time to eat and first set about butchering the wild boar. We boiled water to scald off the hair and scrape it clean, slit open the belly and remove the innards, chopped it into small pieces of about 5 gene each, and laid them out on a long bench and bedboards for the villagers to come by. That year, pork in the city cost 7.5, local pork cost 6, and wild boar meat could sell for 10. The whole wild boar weighed a little over 220 gene, but one side of clean meat was only a little over 60 gene. By the time it was getting dark, there was still a little less than half left. Fifth uncle said we'd take it to town tomorrow to sell. At dusk, I went to collect the grain I had scattered in the morning. At the first spot, the grain had almost all been eaten, and nearly 10 birds lay on the ground. Mountain sparrows, 2 green birds I couldn't name, 1 spotted dove, and 2 fairly large ones. But the second spot was completely empty. Not a single grain remained, and there wasn't a single bird. I squatted in the snow for 5 minutes, but in the end I could only return helplessly. When I got home and told Fifth uncle, his expression darkened, but he didn't say anything. We had wild boar for dinner that night. Fifth aunt bought some hairtail, and my cousin came back too, so the whole family was together for once. At the dinner table, Fifth uncle drank and said, "We made more than 200 yuan today. Tomorrow we'll sell off what's left, and I'll give you 200. I raised my bowl of liquor and clinked it with his, feeling happy inside. Half a wild boar carcass could sell for 6 or 700 yuan, more than most people earned in a month. Taking advantage of the buzz from the alcohol, I asked him, "Uncle, can you tell me about what happened when you were hunting the wild boar? Why did you fall into the bushes after firing? Why did you whistle?" Fifth uncle picked up a peanut and tossed it into his mouth. "I only do that with a sow. It wouldn't work with a boar." He chewed the peanut and looked at me with a smile, as if to say, "Pretty impressive, huh?" That's what he meant. I asked how he could tell from so far away whether it was a boar or a sow. A boar has long tusks and bristles on the back of its neck. Most importantly, there are no boars in a winter wild boar herd. Also, you can tell by the tracks. Then how do you identify a boar? I asked. Boars are generally solitary. They only mix into the herd during breeding season. At other times the sows drive them away. As for tracks, a wild boar's footprint has 4 pointed marks, front and back, right? The front 2 are longer and bigger, while the back 2 are just small holes. The way to tell male from female is to look at the front 2 points. A sow's hoof is a bit smaller, so the pointed marks in the track are smaller too. A boar's hoof is bigger, especially the rear hoof, so the front 2 points in a boar's rear hoof print are longer and wider than a sow's. It's not just a matter of enlarging or shrinking the whole footprint. Those first 2 marks are simply much bigger. Only after hearing Fifth Uncle's explanation did I suddenly understand, thinking there were actually so many tricks to this. Then what were you whistling for? To make it stop, Fifth Uncle said nonchalantly. It took him a long explanation before I finally understood his whole sequence of actions today. So let me explain it to you. Making a sound before shooting was to attract the wild boar's attention. Before that, they had been looking for food the whole time, either constantly rooting in the dirt or walking around. You could aim, sure, but there was a lot of uncertainty. But if you deliberately make some noise, it can't be obvious human speech, or the wild boars will bolt immediately. With that sound, the wild boars become instantly alert, but not so much that they take off running. They'll stop where they are, prick up their ears to listen, and lift their noses to sniff to determine whether there's danger. This time window usually lasts about 5 seconds. And those 5 seconds of shooting time created by a person are basically like shooting at a fixed target. As for why he hit himself immediately after firing, it was to prevent the wild boar from going berserk and charging over to gore someone. Don't be fooled by the gun in his hands. This thing is far too slow to reload. If a wild boar gets close, it just becomes dead weight. Waiting more than 10 minutes afterward was for the same reason too, to prevent an injured wild boar from suddenly lashing out and hurting someone. Delaying for a while serves two purposes. On the one hand, it lets the herd scatter. On the other, it lets the injured boar expend as much strength as possible. Our prey, this one, was hit in the lungs. The steel rod segment entered right behind the elbow of the foreleg. It fled wildly all the way, and in the end its lungs filled with blood, leaving it unable to breathe, and it suffocated to death. Are we going again tomorrow? I bared my teeth and asked softly. Fifth uncle drained the last mouthful of liquor and said we'd see. It's almost New Year, so don't make too much fuss. I thought that made sense too. Just then, the front door was pushed open, and Lu Jujin walked in looking tense. Ling Lao Wu, something's happened. The moment I saw Lu Jujin, I immediately thought of the stolen birds, and my face turned ugly at once, but the old man didn't look at me. Fifth uncle put down his wine bowl and stared at Lu Jujin. Have you eaten dinner yet? Lu Jujin mysteriously leaned in close to fifth uncle. I'll go home and eat later. Let me tell you, today when I went into the mountains, I ran into a tiger. A tiger? The moment I heard the news, my heart gave a thump. What nonsense are you bragging about? Fifth uncle grinned and took a sip of wine. The last time our village killed a tiger was in '64, right? I was only 5 then. It's been almost 40 years now. Where would a tiger come from? Hearing this, Lu Jujin immediately scrunched up his face, his eyes and nose bunching together. Why would I lie to you? I'm 10 years older than you. I've seen dead tigers 2 or 3 times. How could I be mistaken? Your old eyes are going bad. Fifth uncle waved his hand, showing he didn't believe him. All these years, reclaiming land, digging bamboo shoots, chopping trees. We've combed through every mountain within dozens of li around here. If there were tigers, they would have been discovered long ago. Where could you possibly see a tiger? You couldn't even see one if you went to the zoo. Dompa Peak. On that high mountain near Tiger Fur. Lu Jujin shouted. Dompa Peak. Fifth uncle's voice also rose quite a bit. You went that far? Weren't you gathering herbs? You wandered around in the mountains all day? At this point, fifth uncle couldn't help frowning as he sized Lu Jujin up. Being stared at by fifth uncle made him uneasy, and I noticed he was clearly unwilling to dwell on the matter of gathering herbs. Now isn't the time to talk about gathering herbs. What I mean is, should a few of us go together? As he spoke, he made a shooting gesture. These people really had some nerve. I muttered to myself. Leaving aside whether there really was a tiger, if there wasn't, fine, but if there really was, these few people with their homemade guns wanted to trek 10 or 20 kilometers into the deep mountains and old forests to hunt a tiger. That was a man-eating beast. Not to mention, it was also a first-class protected animal. Wouldn't killing a tiger get you sentenced to 8 or 10 years? Fifth uncle ignored Lu Jujin and lowered his head to sip his wine. I'm serious. Someone in Tunxi told me a tiger skin sells for 20,000 apiece. Lu Jujin refused to give up and started trying to tempt him with money. 20,000 was no small sum at the time. An ordinary person made 400 or 500 yuan a month. Someone capable might make 800 or 900. In a year, you could save only about 5,000 yuan. 20,000 was directly equal to 4 years of one person's savings. Did you actually see the tiger? I asked cautiously. Lu Jujin cocked his head and glanced at me, then pulled over a long bench and sat down. Didn't see it, but I heard it roar. If you didn't even see it, then what the hell are you talking about? Fifth uncle sneered. You think I could have heard wrong? Seeing that fifth uncle was unmoved, Lu Jujin grew a little anxious. People buy tiger meat too, 180 per gene. And tiger bones are worth even more, 5,000 yuan per gene. 10,000 per kilogram? Fifth uncle seemed a little interested. That's right. Lu Jujin rubbed his thumb and index finger together. Aren't we working our asses off for money? I heard that once a tiger's bones are dried, they can weigh 20 gene, 100,000 yuan. Let's talk when you actually see a tiger. Fifth uncle shook his head without completely rejecting the idea and began focusing on eating the wild boar meat. The old man rambled on for a while longer, but in the end, seeing that fifth uncle still wouldn't budge, he left helplessly. After he had gone some distance, I finally asked in a low voice, Uncle, are tiger bones really worth that much? More or less. Fifth uncle nodded. When I was little, back in the 60s, they were already 500 per kilogram. Then what about us? I was a little tempted. This was a great way to get rich overnight. Imagining that all it would take was killing a tiger like we'd killed the wild boar today to get more than 100,000 yuan. My heartbeat involuntarily quickened and grew heavier. Don't listen to his bullshit. The people he brought today were probably just here to scout the place. Fifth uncle tossed aside a piece of wild boar bone, his tone somewhat disdainful. Scout what? I didn't quite understand what he meant. Fifth uncle glanced at the front gate, then turned back and clinked his wine bowl against mine. Those people weren't gathering herbs. Not gathering medicinal herbs? I was stunned. On the way back, I had clearly seen those people carrying baskets and hoes, looking just like they were digging for herbs. Could there be something fishy going on here? Seeing that I still didn't quite understand, Fifth uncle smiled lightly. You're still too green. I figure they're taking advantage of these days when heavy snow has sealed off the mountains to go in and look for valuable wild animals. You mean poaching? I suddenly understood. What poaching? Aren't we doing the same thing? Fifth uncle shook his head with a light laugh. I wanted to argue, but after thinking about it, I didn't know how to defend myself. Fifth uncle was right. Since the wildlife protection law was promulgated, all private hunting has been poaching. Later, we chatted some more about hunting. Fifth uncle's experience and ideas were extremely rich. Listening to him talk about his past hunting experiences, I was filled with longing, and from time to time I even felt as if I were there myself. With food and drink enjoyed to the full, there was basically no evening entertainment to speak of, so everyone washed up and went back to their rooms to sleep. The night passed without incident. Early the next morning, I was awakened by a rooster. After getting up, only Fifth Aunt and my sister were at home. Fifth Aunt muttered that these uncles were getting worse year by year, and that the old man was so old he wouldn't even come home for the new year. Hearing her nagging, I felt a mix of emotions, but I still decided to go see Grandpa. While Grandpa was still alive, he didn't live in this house. After Grandma passed away, he continued living alone in the old house far away. I had no money on me, so I had no choice but to go empty-handed. After walking for a few minutes, I arrived in front of Grandpa's house. Hearing the rustling footsteps, my heart trembled. Grandpa. Before long, Grandpa, with a head full of silver hair, stuck his head out and glanced at me without saying a word. I knew this would be his reaction, and that was one of the reasons I hadn't come to see him immediately. After entering the house, I discovered that he was feeding a cat, a plump tabby with a wary look on its face as it stared at me. So young, and instead of being out there making money, what are you doing running back home? Grandpa spoke abruptly. I felt a bit resentful, but I couldn't say it outright. After all, he was my grandpa. The new year is almost here, so I came to see you. I explained softly. Grandpa was 90 years old, and his body was still fairly sturdy. He turned around to lift the boiling water and fill the thermos, and I hurried forward to help, only to be pushed away. No one is looking after you. When you start a family in the future, you'll only be able to rely on yourself. As for whether it's the new year or not, I might die any day, so whether you come see me or not doesn't mean much. Young people should have ambition. If I were you, if I couldn't turn my life around, I'd never come back. Listening to Grandpa's speech left me feeling somewhat helpless. I had heard the same line for years. At the time, I found it somewhat irritating. In my view, however I chose to live was my own business, wasn't it? What are you worrying yourself sick over? But now, looking back, I see it differently. In fact, Grandpa had taken care of me for several years, and he also had another identity, the village's barefoot Chinese medicine practitioner and a half-baked feng shui master. He was called a barefoot Chinese medicine practitioner because he liked studying these things all day long. Every time he went into the mountains, he would bring back some medicinal herbs, saying he was keeping them for his own use. Elderly people who knew him well would occasionally come to him for medicine, and he really could cure minor ailments. As for being a feng shui master, he would choose burial sites for the dead. Whenever an elder in the village passed away, they would invite Grandpa to take a look. A satchel from the last century, a duckbill cap, a compass. I never learned feng shui, and to this day I still can't read a compass. Fifth uncle inherited that skill. As for treating illnesses and identifying medicinal herbs, I did learn a bit under Grandpa's influence. And it was thanks to that when I fled to the Qinling Mountains 2 years later, I didn't die. After saying goodbye to Grandpa, I returned to the house. Fifth uncle had gone to town to sell the wild boar meat, and having nothing else to do, I took out the bow and arrows my father had left behind and practiced. I once heard the adults mention that this bow and arrow could shoot a wild boar dead, but looking at the bow in my hands, I felt a bit doubtful. In fact, my guess was right, it couldn't. I came to this conclusion because a week later I suffered a big loss. The bow was made of wood. I didn't understand it back then, but now I know it was a mulberry bow. The arrows were made from water bamboo, not those decorative things people keep nowadays. Friends from the countryside should know what I mean. About finger thick, 2 to 3 meters long, straight and hard. There were lots of old arrows at home. I rummaged through the pile of odds and ends on the second floor and found a whole bunch. Some had rotted away, but most were still usable. I took the bow and arrows to an open area to practice, and for that I even specifically piled up a snowman. Traditional bows require quite a bit of arm strength. I estimated this bow to be about 50 pounds, which is roughly 45 G of draw weight. At first I couldn't shoot accurately. At a snowman's belly the size of a wash basin, from 20 meters away, I shot 3 arrows before one finally hit, crookedly. Every time I drew the bow, my hands felt a bit strained, and I had to aim and shoot within 2 or 3 seconds, or else I would start shaking. After practicing for about 2 hours, both my arms were aching terribly, and when it felt about noon, I packed up my things and went home. As soon as I walked in, I bumped right into someone coming out. "Huh, Wanli, what are you doing?" I rubbed my chest. Wanli didn't say anything. She glanced at me shyly and ran off. Although we hadn't had much contact in recent years, we had been classmates when we were little. From what I knew about her, that wasn't like her personality. Just then my older female cousin Ling Chunfong walked out. "What are you doing?" I pointed at Wan Li's retreating figure. "Why does she keep coming over to see you every other day?" As soon as I said it, my mind couldn't help but start wandering. Could it be that Wan Li wanted to get close to me through my sister? Why go to all that trouble? Couldn't she just tell me directly? My cousin tossed her head, and her ponytail swung in a circle. "None of your business." I felt a little helpless. I had grown up with my cousin since childhood, and I was always the one getting bullied, which made it hard for me to ever act tough in front of her. But I still got the answer. At lunch, my fifth aunt brought up my question again. My cousin wanted to change the subject, but then my fifth uncle asked once more. In the end, my cousin had no choice but to tell us what had happened. "She came to borrow money from me," my cousin said. The moment fifth aunt heard it was about borrowing money, she immediately became curious. Hadn't she already gone out to work? How much does she want to borrow? All her money was taken by her dad. She's borrowing money because she wants to run away, 300 yuan. Her dad took 5,000 yuan from Lizy next door village, and next year he's going to marry her off to him. After hearing this, everyone at the table fell silent. I felt an indescribable emotion in my heart. A perfectly good girl, married off to a bachelor in his 30s? Actually, things like this were not uncommon at the time. In my hometown, the mindset of favoring boys over girls wasn't especially severe, but it certainly wasn't rare either. There were 3 siblings in Wan Li's family, and her youngest brother was only 10. She was the eldest. Fifth uncle gently set down his bowl of liquor. "Did you lend it to her?" My cousin shook her head. "Not yet. She wants to borrow money to run away to another place, and there's no telling whether she'll ever come back. Calling this money a loan would be less accurate than calling it a gift." I was a bit unsure about 300 yuan. Fifth aunt turned her gaze to fifth uncle. He was the head of the household, and once he spoke, the matter was basically settled. I just couldn't stand this sort of thing. The moment I thought of a former classmate of mine, a perfectly good girl, being sold off to that mangy bastard from the next village to be ruined, I felt a surge of indignation. Fifth uncle seemed to see what I was thinking. He put down his bowl, straightened up, and reached into his pocket. "Chunhua, the wild boar meat has been sold. Here's 200 yuan for you." I hesitated, my hands frozen in midair, unsure whether I should take it. "Uncle, I didn't even do much. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to take a share of this money, would it? If I tell you to take it, then take it." Uncle Wu frowned. I had no choice but to take the 2 blue 100 yuan bills with 4 heads printed on them and tuck them into my pocket. Only then did Uncle Wu bend down and sit back down. "It's New Year. How can a young person get by without a bit of money on them?" I felt deeply moved and secretly swore that when I had money in the future, I would definitely repay Uncle Wu properly. The atmosphere fell silent, and Uncle Wu spoke again. "For the Ruan family's girl, don't lend her the money yet." Hearing that, I felt a little disappointed and turned to glance at my cousin. She looked about the same as I did. "Oh, this matter won't be so easy to pull off. Don't worry. It's not that I can't bear to part with these 300 yuan, but what happens after you lend it to her? If Miss Ruan runs off to another place all by herself, what will she do afterward? Won't she still have to get married and start a family? Then she'll become someone with no natal family to rely on, and the rest of her life will be hard. Things haven't reached that point yet. If she really does get married off there, it won't be too late to give her money then and let her run." After hearing all that, I couldn't stop nodding in my heart. Sure enough, Uncle Wu had the longer view. No matter what, we couldn't just cut off our way out. Many times, what seems like helping someone out may actually be blocking their retreat. After lunch, I saw that the weather was nice, and most of the snow on the roof had melted away. But looking into the distance, the mountains were still a vast expanse of white. Uncle Wu, are we going this afternoon or not? I sidled up to him and made a shooting gesture. Uncle Wu shook his head. It's New Year's and the day after tomorrow. Stop messing around. I was a little disappointed. I was still thinking about getting another wild boar and making a few hundred yuan. After returning to my room, the thought still lingered. If Uncle Wu wouldn't go, couldn't I just go by myself? Recalling the last time we hunted wild boar, it didn't seem all that difficult. Once the idea of going solo popped up, it became impossible to stop. I turned back out of the room and awkwardly came over to Uncle Wu again. Uncle, can we talk about something? Uncle Wu looked at me suspiciously. What are you up to? Well, Uncle. I scratched my butt. Can you lend me the gun for a bit? Uncle Wu's face immediately turned cold, and he stared straight at me with both eyes. His stare made me feel a bit guilty. Fine if you won't lend it. I advise you to give up that idea. Uncle Wu's voice was very serious. I won't lend you the gun. If you're short on money, I can lend you a few hundred yuan right now, no problem. But a gun isn't like other things. No matter who asks, I won't lend it out. Oh, I nodded to show I understood. So the idea of borrowing the gun to go into the mountains was shelved just like that. Although I had a bow and arrows, I always felt my skills weren't good enough to actually hit anything. With nothing to do, I went to sleep. At a little past 2 o'clock, I was awakened by the ding-ding-ding sound of metal knocking. When I went outside to look, a man carrying a shoulder pole was standing at the door, speaking softly with Uncle Wu. When the man saw me, he immediately cut himself off and tentatively asked Uncle Wu, "Is this your son?" Uncle Wu jerked his head. "My nephew. It's fine. Take all 300 yuan. What 300 yuan? This ding-ding candy?" I was a little dumbfounded. The candy peddler carrying the pole put on a bitter face. 260 now. Hides aren't worth much these days. 7 muntjac hides. Last year I was buying them for 40 each. And this year you can't even raise it by 2 yuan? Uncle Wu crossed his arms, looking a little impatient. The two of them bargained back and forth for quite a while, and in the end they settled on a price of 280 yuan. I watched Uncle Wu carry out a bundle of thoroughly dried animal hides from the room. After taking them, the peddler stuffed them under the load on his pole. The mountain's been sealed off by heavy snow this year, and you didn't get a bit more? Before leaving, the peddler offered Uncle Wu a cigarette. Uncle Wu lit it and took a deep drag. No bloodshed during the new year. You still care about that sort of thing? Making money is what matters. The peddler chuckled. A bear hide turned up in the neighboring town 2 days ago. As he spoke, he held up 2 fingers. 2,000. Bears are rare around here, and in winter it's even more out of the question. Fifth uncle shook his head. They're all hibernating deep in the mountains. That's true. The trader nodded, then waved goodbye. I'll come again next year. If you have goods, save them for me, okay? The price is negotiable. As he spoke, he hoisted his shoulder pole and walked off, the load clinking as it knocked against itself. Uncle, animal hides can be sold for money too? I remembered what the trader had said. A bear hide for 2,000. What did 2,000 mean back then? Compared with today, it was no less than 20,000. After fifth uncle finished his cigarette, he tossed the butt down and ground it out with his foot. Hides from jowling, squirrels, barking deer, masked palm civets, hog badgers, and black muntjac were all bought. After thinking it over carefully, a bold idea suddenly arose in my heart. I wanted to make money by hunting. A professional hunter. The moment fifth uncle heard my idea, he rejected it outright. There are so many people in the village who hunt. Have you ever seen any of them get rich from it? Yuchi, person's name, is unmatched at setting traps, but isn't he also out working on construction sites now? Lu Jiujin has been hunting for decades, and isn't he still slaughtering pigs for other people? But I disagreed with fifth uncle's view. Meat could be sold for money, hides could be sold for money, and for a good price too. Why couldn't it make money? The reason none of them could make money was that none of them treated it as their main profession. Hunting was illegal and unstable. Once you had a family, you needed a stable source of income and a proper job to support your wife and children. What did I have to be afraid of? If I couldn't make money in a year, at worst I could just go out to work again the next year. Of course, I didn't say any of this out loud. I just kept it buried in my heart. After dinner, Wanli came by again. She seemed a little evasive when she saw me and ran off to talk to my older female cousin. The moment I thought about how her father had sold her, I had a lot I wanted to say to her. But even when I raised my hand, I ultimately couldn't bring myself to speak. Once I decided to become a full-time hunter, I started preparing that very afternoon. Charged the headlamp, checked the bow and arrows, small dagger, hemp rope, rubber shoes. As the CMA clock hand pointed to 5:30 and the sky grew dim, almost dark, I set out. For night hunting, dusk is the most suitable time period. So-called dusk is the period between the sun going down and the sky turning completely dark. Most wild beasts are active during this time. After 10 p.m., very few animals remain continuously active, and most of them reduce how often they move around. I followed the same path as the day before into the mountains. The snow in the village had mostly melted, but the mountains were still a sheet of white. I had heard Fifth Uncle mention that when wild animals' eyes are caught in a headlamp beam, they reflect light. A rabbit's single visible eye glows red, a muntjac's pair look blue-green like a dog's, and a wild boar's are bluish-white and very bright. After getting away from people's homes, I switched on the headlamp. Good Lord, what I saw made me gasp. Good Lord. I let out a low cry, stunned and somewhat dazed by the scene before me. Everywhere the headlamp reached, there were dazzling, sparkling flashes of color. Some of the gleams were reflections from snow that had melted into ice. Some were droplets at the tips of grass blades, but most were beads of water on spider webs. On a cold winter night, when I shone the light up the mountain, all I could see was a hazy mass of mist. It looked as if the white fog might come rolling down at any moment, giving the feeling of the demonic wind that rises when monsters appear in Journey to the West. It wasn't as if I had never walked at night as a child, but this was the first time I had deliberately observed my surroundings so carefully, so I looked with exceptional attention. Suddenly, there was a rustling in the dead grass not far away, and I quickly turned my head to stare. Under the circle of the headlamp's beam, the yellow grass and white snow were crystal clear, but the rustling had stopped. I was sure I hadn't imagined it just now. There had to be something darting around there. Unable to spot the target, I didn't dare act rashly, afraid that any sound I made would scare the prey away. I lifted the bow in my left hand and set my right hand on an arrow. I was ready to draw and shoot in an instant, yet after standing there for nearly a minute, not even a hair showed up. I was unwilling to give up and a bit exasperated, so I took a few quick steps forward and stomped to drive it out. Even if it darted out and ran off, that would be fine. At least it would prove I wasn't playing a battle of wits with thin air. However, I had heard Fifth Uncle mention that there were more animals in the valley than by the roadside. There isn't much farmland near the village, so if the villagers want to survive and have food to eat, they can only reclaim land in the mountains. The reclaimed land isn't suitable for growing rice, so it's mostly used for vegetables. Areas near mountain vegetable plots are places where animals like wild rabbits, muntjac, and wild boars often appear. It's just that tonight I didn't find anything. The first valley I entered wasn't really deep in the mountains. It was called Qianlongwu, long and narrow, with grassy ground all through the valley. Thinking that I might soon run into the prey I'd been longing for. I was extremely excited, and because of that I deliberately slowed my pace, trying my best not to make any mistakes. In the beam of my headlamp, the white vapor from my breath drifted straight into the valley. The wind wasn't strong. From time to time, faint rustling sounds came from the surroundings. Every time I heard some movement, I would stop and listen, judging whether it was the target prey. Later I came to understand that the sounds were made by mice. Tiny little things, scurrying around, and when the light caught their eyes, they gave off a dark glow like red agate, not bright. As I walked longer and longer, the excitement in my heart faded quite a bit. Not finding any prey, I felt somewhat discouraged. It looked like I was about to reach the end of the valley, and any farther ahead meant climbing up the hillside, where the trees were dense and the brambles overgrown, and I wasn't very willing to push through. Helpless, I swept my headlamp around aimlessly. Ow! A bark-like cry startled me. Before I could come to my senses, there came another owl. What was that? I felt a little nervous, and at the same time a little excited. The cry was very loud, and without even thinking, I knew the thing couldn't be very small. At the very least, it was about the size of a dog. Sound echoed in the valley, so at first I couldn't tell exactly where it was. As long as I swung my headlamp around, it would call out, one bark after another, short and loud. Only after listening for nearly a full minute did I confirm that it should be on the slope some 40 or 50 meters to my front left. In the bushes, ow! Another bark rang out, making me both anxious and delighted. The good thing was that it still hadn't moved and had stayed in that same spot. The frustrating thing was that I still couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was. I had thought that as long as my headlamp shone on its position, I would be able to clearly see the reflection in the prey's eyes. I was also sure it had to be staring at me right now, but I just couldn't see it. That really made me frantic. I began to grow impatient, irritable, and even, like before, stomped my feet and called out in a low voice. That creature kept barking all the same. as if it were mocking my incompetence. Fuck that. I couldn't take it anymore. I drew the bow and shot an arrow wildly toward that spot. The sound of the arrow striking branches was clearly audible, and the beast's cries gradually faded into the distance. Sigh. I let out a sigh. My whole mood had turned somewhat low. At first I had been brimming with enthusiasm. Then it gradually became dull and tasteless, and in the end the prey found me first. My interest had risen, and now it had cooled off even more completely. I didn't know what time it was by then. Beyond the circle of light, there was nothing but endless darkness all around, and my feet felt a little cold. I reached out and brushed my sleeve. It was covered in a damp layer of mist, frost. Better head home first, I muttered to myself. My first solo night hunt ended empty-handed, and it hit me hard. I began to doubt my own ideas, wondering whether I had made everything seem too simple. The walk back felt lighter, setting aside the fact that I was going downhill. With none of the curiosity for exploration I had on the way here, I naturally stopped being so restrained. When I reached the middle section of the valley, my attention was suddenly drawn to a point of light at the base of a clump of elephant grass off to the front right. Once I saw it clearly, my heartbeat suddenly sped up. It was a point of light like a lit cigarette, but rather dim, and if you looked closely it even seemed to flicker. I stared at the light for a few seconds, and it gave a faint little flash. A wild rabbit. I tried my best to keep my head still so the headlamp wouldn't sway. I was afraid of scaring it away. If I hadn't spotted the red glint of its eyes in the wild grass, I really couldn't have made out the outline of its body. Even now, despite already knowing it was there, I still couldn't see its outline clearly. I could only sketch its current posture in my mind based on the position of its eyes. I slowed my movements as much as possible, drew the bow, aimed 10 centimeters behind the eyes, and lowered it a few centimeters. I guessed it was lying on the ground, and what I needed to aim at was its heart-lung area. The so-called heart-lung area is a key point that must be understood in hunting, namely the location of the prey's heart and lungs. The heart-lung area of all prey is in the front part of the chest, slightly above the point of the front leg's elbow. If you have cats or dogs at home, you can roughly judge it as the place midway between the point of the front leg's elbow and the armpit. An arrow or a bullet, if it goes in there, it's certain death. Although my archery at this moment could be called trash, I still had to aim, right? I was extremely excited, terrified I'd miss, and didn't dare release the arrow for a long time. A few seconds later, my drawing hand started to tremble. I knew I couldn't drag it out any longer. Just take a gamble. With a soft twang, the arrow left the string. The wild rabbit's miserable cry rang out right after, squeaky like a mouse. I hit it. I was overjoyed, thrilled beyond measure. Under the beam of the headlamp, the rabbit thrashed violently. So it was naturally no longer like before, when I couldn't make out its outline while it was camouflaging itself. It struggled and thrashed in big movements, like it had gone mad. I stepped forward a few paces, hesitating over whether to reach out and pin it down, and also afraid it might bite me. Just as I was hesitating, it suddenly bolted into the bushes with the arrow still in it. Damn it! I stared blankly in the direction the rabbit had fled and burst out cursing. So angry I was beside myself. The rabbit that was practically in my hands had actually run off. I regretted it to death. If I'd just steeled myself and pounced right away, could it have escaped? You little brat. I wasn't willing to just let it get away like that, because I noticed blood on the ground. Thinking back to how Fifth Uncle had tracked the wild boar, I was going to track this rabbit too. The bushes were a tangled mess, packed thick with all kinds of tiny vines and leaves, making it a real hassle for a person to crawl into. But once I thought of the wild rabbit having gone in there, I couldn't care about any of that. The snow covering the ground in the mountains had mostly melted, with only a thin layer left, and stepping on it felt like crushed ice. The wild rabbit's tracks were hard to find. Fortunately, there were still traces of blood. This was the first time I had ever hit prey, and there was no way I was going to give up easily. Following the blood trail for 20 or 30 meters, I finally found the rabbit at the base of a pine tree. The arrow had entered through its back, passed through its chest, and come out under the armpit on the other side, bright red blood gushing out in streams. I prodded it with the bow. No response. It was completely dead. Only after confirming it wouldn't give me a dying bite did I finally reach out, grab its leg, and lift it up. 3 Gene. I weighed it in my hand, overjoyed. The rabbit's feet were damp and a little cold in my hand, so I switched hands and held it by the ears as I headed back the way I came. Catching a wild rabbit made this trip worthwhile. On the way back, I kept calculating how much this rabbit was worth. As I walked, I looked over the rabbit in my hand, imagining how much meat would be left after skinning and cleaning it. The final conclusion was 1.5 Gene. Sold whole, it would go for about 50. Sold separately, the meat would fetch a little over 30, and the skin could also be sold for money. After all that figuring, I decided to skin it when I got home. When I returned to the village, the dogs kept barking nonstop, probably because the bloody smell of the rabbit in my hand had stimulated them. I didn't use the snakeskin sack, and instead was actually hoping someone would see me, because I felt like I was returning in triumph, with quite a rewarding haul. Only if people saw me could they click their tongues in praise. At the time, I was rather enjoying that vanity and found it very gratifying. Unfortunately, it was like wearing fine clothes at night. There wasn't a single person to be seen on the way. I pushed open the gate of the old house. The incandescent bulb inside was still on, and the Simon clock pointed to 7:40. "Uncle?" I called out softly. Before long, fifth uncle pushed open the door. Seeing me with a bough slung over my shoulder and a rabbit in hand, he froze for a moment. "You little rascal." As he spoke, he walked out of the room. "Where did you get it?" "At Kianlongwo." I held up the rabbit, afraid he hadn't seen it clearly. "Oh right, uncle. I also heard some kind of wild beast calling in there." "What did it sound like?" fifth uncle asked. I thought about it for a moment, then imitated the sound I had heard before with a couple of calls. "A bit like a dog." Fifth uncle's eyes lit up when he heard it. That was the call of a barking deer. A muntjac? I felt both excited and a little disappointed. I thought, why didn't that damned muntjac just stand by the roadside waiting for me? What kind of nonsense was it? Hiding in the bushes and calling out. Fifth uncle stood in the main room for a while in just his long johns, shivering a little. "Get a rope and hang the rabbit up. Don't let cats, dogs, or rats gnaw on it tonight. Take it to sell tomorrow." I responded with an "oh" and, as he said, found a rope, tied it up, and hung it high. That night, I tossed and turned, my head full of the muntjac's call. Later, when I got up at night to pee, I grabbed my bow and arrows again and ran into the mountains. When I reached the place where the muntjac had called before, I shouted as I charged into the bushes, startling 2 or 3 small deer about the size of dogs. They ran very fast, darting past me and onto the mountain opposite. I chased after them again, tireless and swift as the wind, unstoppable. The dead branches and fallen leaves couldn't withstand a single charge from me. I swept through the forest in all directions like some god of war, but unfortunately, I didn't see the muntjac. Then, in an unnamed valley, I heard the muntjac call again. But when I chased after it, I discovered a giant snake as thick as a bucket hidden in the woods, writhing like a dragon and opening its huge mouth to bite me. I shuddered in fright and heard a rooster crowing outside. So it had all been a dream. After washing up and eating breakfast, fifth uncle pointed at the rabbit. "Coming with me to town to sell it? Shouldn't we skin it first?" I asked, taking the rabbit down. Fifth uncle widened his eyes. "Why skin it when it's perfectly fine? Once it's cleaned up, how much weight would be left?" "I want to sell the skin too," I said. Fifth uncle paused for a moment before understanding what I meant. He pointed at the rabbit and shook his head. "Nobody buys rabbit skins, and besides, your arrow went right through it. There are 2 holes in the skin. No one wants that." Huh. What he said left me somewhat disappointed. To think rabbit skin wasn't wanted at all. Weren't they just 2 finger-sized holes? You wouldn't even notice them unless you looked closely. Does that really matter? If you want to sell fur, then it can't be damaged. A small hole in a more valuable hide can cut the price in half. Rabbits are common as dirt, and nobody buys them. If you want an intact hide, then either you use a snare, set a trap, or poison it. After hearing fifth uncle's explanation, I finally understood. So my plan from last night was just wishful thinking after all. It seems I still need to learn more about the specifics. Since the idea of selling the hide fell through, I can only sell the whole rabbit. Thinking that I'd often be taking things to town to sell in the future, it would be good to follow Fifth Uncle and get familiar with the place. Fifth Uncle rode his old 28-inch bicycle, and I pushed out the bicycle my older female cousin used to ride and headed to town. I put the rabbit into a woven plastic sack and tied it to the rear seat. The village road was still a dirt road, and after several days of snow, the ground was unbearably muddy. The bicycle kept slipping, and I nearly fell several times. After riding for a little over half an hour, nearly 40 minutes, we arrived in town. Fifth Uncle led me to a meat stall at the little vegetable market. He Lao San, wild rabbit. The fat butcher had a face full of scruffy beard stubble. He smiled at Fifth Uncle. Got another rabbit? Same old price. Fifth Uncle twitched the corner of his mouth and said okay, then told me to hand the rabbit to him. He Lao San took the woven plastic sack, pulled out the rabbit, and looked it over. This wasn't shot with a musket, was it? Why do you care so much? Just take it. Fifth Uncle urged in a low voice. He Lao San picked up the scale beam, hooking the hook into the hole made by the arrow. 3 Gene. I'll give you 12. After getting the money, I quickly stuffed it into my pocket. Seeing this, he loused and chuckled. "Kid, did you shoot this rabbit?" I nodded and said yes. After chatting a bit more, fifth uncle went to buy some other things and told me to wait for him. By the time we got home, it was already close to 11. Both fifth uncles and my pant legs were smeared with mud, so we had no choice but to scrub them clean by the sink with a brush. "Go get 2 bags of salt," fifth uncle suddenly said. Although I didn't understand, I still did as he said. After getting the 2 bags of salt, fifth uncle poured all of it into a small clay basin, added some water, and then picked up a few sandy stones and soaked them in it. Watching what he was doing, I wondered what it was for, but fifth uncle didn't explain and just worked in silence. I practiced archery in the afternoon, and during dinner that night, fifth uncle brought up the salt. "Come up the mountain with me early tomorrow morning." I blinked. "Didn't you say we wouldn't be fussing around during the New Year? Tomorrow is Lunar New Year's Eve. If I tell you to go, then go. If you won't, I'll go by myself." Fifth uncle jutted out his lips, his tone unpleasant. Of course I agreed with a smile. Only a fool would refuse. Fifth uncle was highly experienced, so how could I be unwilling to follow him and learn? Nowadays, old generation hunters with rich experience are becoming fewer and fewer. Most are already in their 50s or 60s, or even older. That night, a little after 9, I drowsily heard Lu Eugene's voice, as if he was saying something to fifth uncle. I didn't hear clearly and didn't get up to look. Early the next morning, fifth uncle was already standing at the door waiting for me, holding a hoe and a woven plastic sack. "What's in there?" I pointed at the woven plastic sack. It was bulging, with quite a lot inside. Fifth uncle cleared his throat and didn't explain, only saying I'd know when we got there. Thinking of what happened yesterday afternoon, I guessed the sack probably contained those things from yesterday, though from the sounds there seemed to be metal and porcelain inside. On Lunar New Year's Eve, there were quite a few people coming and going at the village entrance. But no one really paid any attention to us uncle and nephew. When we reached the front of Qianlong Hollow, fifth uncle told me to lead the way to the place where we had the encounter the night before last. I nodded, but my mind involuntarily recalled the dream I had that night. Deep in the valley, the scene seen by lamplight at night looked very different from how it appeared in the daytime, and it took me quite a while to identify the exact spot. It was a grove of dawn redwoods, the scratchy kind, whose dry branches are often used in the countryside for kindling. After confirming it again and again, fifth uncle began surveying the surroundings. We were standing in the valley, on a relatively flat patch of grass. The dawn redwoods were 20 or 30 meters away, with a thicket of bushes in between. "Look around and see if there are any leaves that have been nibbled," fifth uncle called out as he walked to the bushes. I understood what he meant. He wanted us to look for traces left by muntjac after feeding. Muntjac are forest-dwelling animals that like to hide in bushes. They are very timid, and their range of activity is only a few hundred to 1,000 meters. It didn't take me much effort to find that the tender shoots of some small shrubs had been bitten clean off. Fifth uncle came over for a look. "Move aside." I stepped back a few paces and watched his movements carefully. First, he used a machete to clear out an open strip in the bushes, about 30 centimeters wide and half a meter deep, then used a hoe to dig a pit at the very back. The pit wasn't big, only a little over 10 centimeters deep and about the size of a bowl opening. Seeing him dig the pit, I guessed fifth uncle was probably going to set a trap. And sure enough, he pulled out 2 iron traps the size of a palm from the woven plastic sack, that is, animal traps. Besides the traps, there was also a bag of salt, a wet cloth, a bowl, and the 2 stones from yesterday. What was the salt for? I was a little confused. "Muntjac eat salt?" Fifth uncle curled his lip. "Anything with antlers needs to eat salt." He put the bowl into the pit he had dug, pressed it down firmly, then poured the salt into it. 1 whole bag of salt filled most of the bowl, and then he began sprinkling dirt on top. He only sprinkled on a thin layer of soil, just enough to conceal the salt and the bowl, leaving it nearly level with the ground. After doing that, he placed the 2 stones that had been soaked in salt above the bowl, exposed outside. "Is this bait?" I asked. Fifth uncle nodded. Wild animals have very keen noses. They can smell the salt. In late winter and early spring, muntjac lack salt, so they'll come to eat it. I was secretly amazed. Fifth uncle wasn't highly educated and hadn't really gone out into the world much, so how did he know so much? After finishing the bait, he pulled some grass and leaves from nearby to lightly cover up the dug-up area, then dug a second pit about 20 centimeters away from the salt bowl. This time he dug 2 pits in a row, one at the entrance of the cleared passage and the other in the middle, with the bait at the very back. The pits were all about the same size, with a diameter of a span, a little over 10 centimeters, and the depth was about the same. Once the pits were ready, he started setting the traps, stepping on the iron frames to open them, setting the safety catch, and then carefully placing them into the pits. One end of each trap was tied with a thin steel wire rope, which was fixed to the root of a nearby bush. He blocked the top of the trap with thin dead twigs, then covered it with some dead leaves and dirt, and finally broke off some fresh shrub branches and leaves to block the open spaces on both sides. As I understood it, the fresh branches and leaves served three purposes. First, they narrowed the passage. So if the muntjac wanted to go in, it had to pass over the trap, preventing it from becoming suspicious and going around the side of the trap where the soil had been turned over. Second, they hid the steel wire rope. Wild animals are mostly very cautious, and they will hesitate at the slightest sign that something is wrong, especially with metal objects. Lastly, and most importantly, they concealed the scent. Plants have their own distinctive smells, and the stronger ones we know include perilla, white perilla, pine needles, Houtoinia cordata, and so on, while for animals, they can distinguish the smell of every kind of plant. Using a large number of fresh plant branches and leaves to cover the area around the trap can effectively mask the smell of the iron trap. I wouldn't say it hides it completely, but it definitely has some effect. After finishing the trap, Fifth Uncle squatted on the ground and used a branch to sweep along the trap path a bit. Finally, he took out the wet cloth and wrung out some drops of water around the area, with more the closer it was to the trap. "Let's go." Fifth Uncle packed up his things and called me to head home. On the way back, I asked him some more questions about setting animal traps. Animal traps are relatively easy to get, and nowadays you can even buy them online, but there are mainly two ways to set them. One is to place them selectively using bait, like Fifth Uncle did. The other is to look for animal trails and set them on paths that wild animals frequently use. I'll talk later about how to find and identify animal trails. This thing is fairly dangerous, and it comes in many types. The small ones are only about the size of a baby's fist, mostly used to trap rats, squirrels, bamboo partridges, and the like. The bigger ones are the kind Fifth Uncle uses to catch muntjac, about the size of a palm. They can catch rabbits, muntjac, badgers, foxes, and other prey that aren't very large. The next size up is as big as a large plate, and setting them is fairly troublesome and also very dangerous. When necessary, tools are needed to open them. They are used to hunt large prey such as bears, wild boars, sika deer, suro, water buffalo, and so on. You must be extremely cautious when setting this kind of trap, and they must never, ever be placed on paths used by people. Once they injure someone, it can mean broken bones and torn tendons. In the past, when hunters in the mountains set iron traps, they would put up warning signs anywhere, even somewhat close to where villagers were active, and the signs included both text and pictures. I remember the signs Grandpa often put up used to say, "Iron traps ahead, no entry for bystanders." Then he would draw a picture of an iron trap beside it as a warning. Quite a few people of the older generation in the countryside never went to school, so not being able to read was perfectly normal. That's why drawings were necessary. After returning home, we started getting busy with New Year's Eve dinner. Lunch was handled simply, just 2 or 3 dishes. Dinner, the reunion meal, was eaten very early. Starting at 2 in the afternoon, firecrackers began going off here and there throughout the village, announcing that the feast had begun. At 2:40, Fifth Uncle set off firecrackers, and the whole family filled the table. Grandpa came over too. At the start of the meal, there wasn't much conversation. Everyone was focused on eating and drinking. All the food and drink we normally couldn't bear to touch had been brought out. After a few rounds of drinking, people naturally started talking more and rambling on, and I slowly became the subject of their discussion. Grandpa asked me when I was going to find a woman and start a family. I felt a little shy and just gave a foolish grin without answering. Fifth Uncle suddenly asked me, "If you go out for migrant work next year and save a bit more money, I'll have your aunt find you a match later." Fifth Aunt smiled from the corners of her eyes. Save a bit more money and anything can be discussed. I hesitated for a while, then stood up. "Uncle, next year I want to stay in my hometown." "Stay in your hometown and do what? How much money can farming make?" "I want to make money from hunting." My tone was a little soft, but my eyes were very firm. "Bullshit. If you plan to make money from hunting, then you deserve to be a bachelor for the rest of your life, and your family line will die out." "Uncle, listen to me." I picked up my bowl of wine and drank it dry in one gulp. Today we were drinking homemade rice wine. It tasted sweet going down, had a decent kick afterward, and wasn't hard to drink. Ever since I was little, you and Aunt have raised me, and I'm very grateful to you. I'm 19 this year. After today, I'll be 20. Starting a family isn't that easy. It takes money. And without money, When you go out, people can hardly be bothered to pay attention to you. You can't stand tall, and no one listens to what you say. I don't want to burden you anymore. I need to find my own way to make money. Right now, outside on construction sites, it's 20 a day. 25 days a month makes 500 kwai dot, and after slogging away for a whole year, you save 3 or 4,000. Then what? Getting a wife takes money. Fixing up a house takes money. And once you have children, doesn't all that take money too? Hunting isn't stable, but I've worked out the numbers these past few days. One rabbit is 10 kwai. One muntjac can bring 2 or 300 for the meat, 40 for the hide, and wild boar meat is 10 kwai per gene. As long as I work hard and my luck isn't too bad, no matter what, it won't be worse than migrant work. Uncle, after saying all that in one go, I felt my head burning hot and my whole body tensed up. Everyone at the table looked at me. Fifth uncle's eyes were wide open, and his expression was very ugly. Do you know what kind of road this is? Fifth uncle roared in a low voice. Bang! Grandpa heavily set his rice bowl down on the table. What day is it today? Do you take me for someone who went burrowing in the mud? Oh, come on. Why make it like this on New Year's Eve? If there's something to discuss, talk about it slowly in a few days. Fifth aunt tugged at fifth uncle's arm. But fifth uncle didn't budge and kept staring fixedly at me. This is an illegal line of work. Usually when villagers do a little of it, everyone understands without saying anything and things stay peaceful. But if a hot-headed kid like you tries to make a living from hunting, how do you think others will come after you? If the police station catches you, your whole life will be ruined. I stood there in a daze, not knowing how to respond to him for a moment. But I knew very clearly, deep down and with firm certainty, that I wanted to hunt. Your father died early, so no one controls you. Should I, as your uncle, not care about you? I may be useless, spending my whole life farming in these old mountains, but I still can't let you go down this road. I shouldn't have taken you up the mountain these past few days. Fifth uncle grew more and more agitated as he spoke. If Grandpa hadn't been sitting nearby, I figured he might even have smashed his bowl. Uncle, I'm grown up. Let me choose my own path for the future. I poured myself another bowl of liquor, my head a little muddled. Dragons have their way, rats have theirs. I want to give it a try. I'll think carefully about what to do. At worst, in a year or two, I'll go out and find migrant work again. Uncle, calm down a bit. I drained the liquor in one gulp and sat down, bracing myself on the table. Fifth uncle let out a heavy sigh and said a few things I didn't catch clearly. As the alcohol hit me, my stomach churned nonstop, and I was so dizzy I couldn't even sit still. The whole table was chattering away, and to my ears it only sounded more noisy and irritating. Finally, after holding it in for a long time, I rushed to the doorway and vomited my guts out. When I sobered up the next day, I was already lying in bed. Speaking with the benefit of hindsight, a person really does need to have something they insist on. If you have the ability and the courage, then don't just follow the crowd. Following the crowd is bound to leave you swallowed up in the sea of people with no chance of ever standing out. The farmers of 20 or 30 years ago, facing the yellow earth with their backs to the sky, and the migrant laborers hauling bricks and laying tiles in the cities day and night, were cheaply employed by the bosses of that time. Those brothers who suffered every hardship pinned their hopes on their children. But how many of today's college students were raised through the bitter toil of that earlier generation of brothers? They are still being cheaply employed by bosses. The affairs of the world are a cycle. Only by stepping outside the 6 realms can one avoid being trapped in reincarnation. But don't get the wrong idea. I'm not telling you to go do anything illegal. Be law-abiding and be a good citizen. Ahem. Early the next morning, my mouth was unbearably dry, and I was awakened by the sound of firecrackers at dawn. When I went outside and saw Fifth Uncle, I felt a little guilty. Uncle. I greeted him softly. Fifth Uncle said nothing and just kept setting off firecrackers on his own. The village wasn't big, but amid the crackling blasts of Urjiao firecrackers shooting up from every household, it still felt lively and festive. I felt that Fifth Uncle was really angry with me, and I didn't dare go talk to him. At lunch, I sat at the table with my head down, shoveling rice into my mouth. After finishing a bowl, my head still felt murky and unsteady, so I planned to sleep a little more. Wait a moment. Fifth Uncle's voice came over. I froze for a second, feeling a little nervous, afraid that he was going to lecture me again. Fifth Uncle went back into the room, and when he came out, he had an exercise book for handwriting practice in his hand. This is the road you chose yourself. Once the 15th day of the first lunar month passes, the new year is considered over. Starting from the 16th, anything you eat or use from me will be counted and charged. After throwing out those words, Fifth Uncle went back to his seat and continued eating. My heart was filled with mixed feelings. One moment I worried whether I had chosen the wrong path. The next I felt that maybe this had hurt Fifth Uncle's feelings, but in the end I still couldn't help feeling excited inside. This counted as Fifth Uncle's tacit approval. Alone in the room, I flipped through the handwriting practice book by the light from the window. The notebook was filled with writing, packed densely from page to page. The handwriting was somewhat messy. It was Fifth Uncle's handwriting, and it looked like it had some years on it. The paths rabbits take are generally beside human paths. Sometimes they also follow human paths. Barking deer travel along the mountainside, lower than wild boar trails. Five-pace snakes are often found near bamboo groves and rock piles. Be careful when walking. Giant salamanders can still be found in the Yunqing direction. Someone has seen bears there. The pangolin market has soared in recent years. Pity they're nowhere to be seen anymore. I skimmed through it roughly and was deeply shocked. This is a proper hunting notebook, containing all of Fifth Uncle's hunting experience. It includes several hunting methods, such as patrol hunting, ambush hunting, driving game through the mountains, baiting, poison bait, and traps. It also mentions some simple trap-making methods, the tracks of wild animals, and their general habits. I can't speak for farther away, but almost all the wild animals within dozens of kilometers of my home are recorded here. While everyone else was visiting relatives and playing cards at the start of the year, I stayed holed up in my room alone, studying the notes Fifth Uncle gave me. On the morning of the second day of the new year, Fifth Uncle went into the mountains. And when he came back, there was something in his woven sack. A muntjac, the one that had barked at me. A muntjac is about the size of a mutt. Looks like a small deer, with prominent antlers and two-tier grooves at the corners of its eyes. It weighed a little over 10 jin, and that very day he gave me 20 yuan, saying it was payment for the information I provided. It's true that every trade needs to be passed down. That's partly why I'm writing this too, to share my own experience. Fifth Uncle is the man who raised me, and also my master. Many things are hard to grasp by fumbling around on your own if no one points them out to you. For example, patrol hunting. Like the time I hunted rabbits, the hunter searches along the roads. It seems simple, but there's plenty of know-how involved. On the 15th day of each lunar month, when the moon is full, the moonlight is bright and wild animals have good visibility, so they're more likely to notice people coming. The end and beginning of the month, when the moonlight is dim, is the best time for hunting. When hunting, you need to find the upwind side. If you're downwind, human scent can drift for hundreds of meters, and wild animals will smell it from far away and avoid you, and so on. It wasn't until the fourth day that Fifth Uncle, Fifth Aunt, and my cousin were going out to Fifth Aunt's parents' home. They asked if I was going, and I said no. Staying home alone was pretty nice, and I was also thinking of going into the mountains at the start of the lunar month to get some practice. After reading Fifth Uncle's notes, I felt like my abilities had greatly improved. I wanted to test the actual results. Fifth Aunt's parents' home is deep in the mountains of another township, a long way off, so Fifth Uncle and the others probably wouldn't be back tonight. For lunch and dinner, I just ate leftovers and made do with something simple. The weather was cloudy today, and by the afternoon the sky already felt somewhat gloomy. By 4:30, it was already starting to seem like night wanted to fall. It had been more than a week since the last snowfall, and the snow in the mountains had completely melted away. It was no longer very likely that I could, like Fifth Uncle last time, go up into the mountains during the day to look for animal tracks. So I chose patrol hunting at dusk. This is also one of the most commonly used hunting methods among hunters all over the country. Headlamp, dagger, woven sack, bow and arrows, and also a machete. Last time I went to Qianlongwu, but this time I wasn't planning to go there. That's because muntjac are territorial. At most there are only one or two in a valley. There may be more during the breeding season, but not now. Fifth Uncle said that starting from the 16th I would have to fend for myself, so tonight I had to make something happen. Thinking of the hunting notes Fifth Uncle gave me, I reviewed them in my mind once and then began searching along the mountain path. The slopes beside mountain vegetable plots, the banks of clear mountain streams, and the edges of dense thickets. These are all places where wild animals often appear. Because this was patrol hunting and searching, I couldn't move fast. Otherwise, the sound of my footsteps would be too clear and would scare off the prey. After searching at half my normal walking speed for nearly half an hour, the sky had already grown extremely dark, and I couldn't make out anything beyond 10 meters, so I could only rely on the headlamp. Speaking of the headlamp, I have to mention its main use. Headlamps on the market today generally come in 4 light colors: white, red, yellow, and green. Their main function is to shine into the prey's eyes and make them reflect light, making them very easy to see at night. Friends who grew up in the countryside have probably had the experience of running into cats or dogs while walking at night. Cats' eyes reflect green light, and they're very conspicuous even from dozens of meters away. Dogs' eyes reflect a blue-green light, also clearly visible from dozens of meters away. That is where the value of a headlamp lies. If you're thinking of relying on the headlamp's beam to see the prey's body, wanting to see its appearance clearly is almost impossible with a very low chance. First of all, wild animals are even more vigilant than domesticated cats and dogs. Once they notice you, they may already flee when they are over 100 meters away. In most cases, the hunter spots the prey from 20 or 30 meters away. The brightness of an ordinary headlamp is generally insufficient to clearly outline its body. You can only see the reflection from its eyes. White light seems the clearest, but it is actually the least useful. Animals are extremely sensitive to white light. The moment they see it, they will immediately bolt. Yellow light and green light are more useful, as prey is not very sensitive to these two light colors. If you shine them on it, it may even stare at you foolishly, unable to figure out what is going on. Back to the point. After entering the mountains near my hometown and going deeper in, there is a fork in the road. Going straight east leads to Jiwu, the deep mountain area that Fifth Uncle and Lu Jujin mentioned before as having medicinal herbs. The other road goes south. This road is farther and leads directly to Liangking and Dongpojian. Continuing south along the mountain range and ridges brings you to what is now Qianjianjuan National Forest Park. I hesitated for a while at the fork, somewhat unsure which way to go. Due east, through Shushan to Jiwu, is primeval forest. So-called primeval forest means forest that has not suffered large-scale human destruction for more than 100 years, where the animals and plants still maintain a relatively complete and primitive ecological chain. There are leopards and bears in this place. Back then, before the G3 Beijing-Taipei Expressway and the G56 Hangzhou Expressway had begun construction, the whole vast area was primeval forest. After hesitating for a while, I finally chose the Shushan direction. This place is spoken of in the village as something mysterious. All kinds of ghost stories and rumors of fierce beasts mostly come from Shushan. The reason I chose this direction was not because I wasn't afraid, but because I felt the Yunqing direction would be even more terrifying. The reason Shushan is described in such mystical terms is, in the final analysis, because villagers go there every year. So stories spread. Yunqing, however, is divided into inner and outer parts, namely inner Yunqing and outer Yunqing. No one has lived in inner Yunqing for decades, and no one dares go to that godforsaken place all year round. I didn't dare go either. After deciding on the direction, I started walking inward. Once past the fork, I had officially entered the vast mountains. There were no longer any hillside vegetable plots or tea gardens around. Only ancient trees, strange rocks, moss, and thick vines everywhere. The path followed the foot of the mountain inward, and on the other side was a clear mountain stream. The murmuring sound of flowing water brought a trace of life to these great mountains. After climbing over a rock face, I was instantly struck as if by lightning. A pair of glowing green eyes was staring at me from a little over 10 meters away, because it had already become completely dark in the mountains. I couldn't make out exactly what it looked like. I could only judge from the distance between its eyes that this thing wasn't very large. I tried hard to keep my body steady and not let the headlamp shake, for fear of startling it away. I drew the bow and knocked an arrow. It ran. Helpless, I lowered my bow and arrow. My heart was still pounding, but I felt very frustrated. I thought the reason it fled was that the sound of my walking had alerted it to me in advance. So it was wary of my movements, and at the slightest sign something was wrong, it ran. There was nothing I could do about that, so I could only sigh to myself in secret. I continued on and went around a bend. And to my surprise, I found that pair of glowing green eyes still ahead of me. It had not run far. In an instant, a sense of something lost and regained rose in my heart. With the experience from the previous time, this time I had an arrow knocked in advance and shuffled forward slowly. Sure enough, it moved off to one side again. It walked, not bolted. I followed and discovered it was hiding in a pile of dead grass, apparently trying to use the dead grass as cover while secretly observing me. I kept the headlamp steady and began to draw the bow. With a soft twang, the arrow flew from the string. Meow, a dull thud of the arrow hitting flesh rang out instantly. In the light, this prey suddenly sprang half a meter into the air, then desperately bolted into the grass. What the hell? My heart skipped a beat. It was a cat. I felt some regret, but there was nothing I could do. I was certain the arrow had hit it just now. This cat definitely wasn't going to survive. It would die. I was sure of that. The problem was where it would die. If it died in the mountains, it wouldn't be a big issue. What I feared was that it might cling to life and run back to the village. Who the hell knows why a cat would run this deep into the mountains in the middle of the night? I felt a surge of anger. If this cat ran back to the village with an arrow stuck in its body, its owner would definitely come looking to make trouble for me. I'm the only one in the whole village who uses a bow and arrow. Even though I'd only just started a few days ago, all it would take was asking the villagers around to trace it back to me. Quite a few people had watched me practice archery in the open area before, so I chased after the cat in the direction it had fled. I had to kill the cat to silence it. I absolutely couldn't let it leave the mountains alive, or else someday its owner might stab me in the back and report me. Luckily, I found it again after searching not too far. It was a fat orange cat, and the arrow had pierced through its spine and gotten stuck in the grass, leaving it unable to move. When it saw me coming, the cat immediately bared its ferocity, making huffing sounds and brandishing its claws and teeth. Sorry about this. I pulled out the snakeskin sack and pressed it down in one go.